I mean, what we are actually also seeing is literally the way that Putin regards Trump as a useful idiot, which was, of course, Lenin's term of those in the West who supported Soviet communism. And this is really a way of seeing how he has been teased even by Putin.
First up, President Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg, has told the Times and the country that the country could be partitioned like post-war Berlin as part of a peace deal with Russia. Now, Kellogg suggested that the UK and France could adopt zones of control in the west of Ukraine, and Russia's army would remain in the occupied east. Sir Antony, what do you make of what General Kellogg has been saying?
Well, it is a preposterous comparison because in 1945, Germany was in the state of what's called Stunde Null. I mean, it was absolutely flattened. It had no administration at all. And here we have Ukraine, which has a fully functioning democracy. So what it actually is revealing is quite how weak the White House is in its dealings with Putin. They have got no control. They are obviously flapping around because Putin is simply laughing in his sleeve at what Trump is attempting to do. So I think we've really got to underline this appalling way that they are repeating basically Soviet or Russian propaganda from the Kremlin, implying that Ukraine is somehow Nazi. But I mean, what we are actually also seeing is literally the way that Putin regards Trump as a useful idiot, which was, of course, Lenin's term of those in the West who supported Soviet communism. And this is really a way of seeing how he has been teased even by Putin. We saw this at Osaka, as Fiona Hill described, when Trump started sort of saying how much he'd done for Israel. And Putin said, I've done a lot for Israel too. Oh, but nobody's done as much for Israel as I have. And then Putin, as a joke, sort of says, well, maybe they should call the country after you. And Trump reflected on this for a few moments and then said, no, I think that would be going a bit too far. He has no idea how much they despise him. And I think that this is a pathetic situation that the world should find itself in.
Also, Sir Antony, what is confusing is that Russia have already made it clear they would not accept any NATO forces in Ukraine. Now, the Americans try and portray this as a win from their side of the negotiations, because they are suggesting that UK and French troops, along with Ukrainian troops, are having control of the western part of Ukraine.
But I mean, Putin is still rejecting that entirely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what is so preposterous. He is not agreeing to anything that the Americans have suggested, and this is why I think in the background there's sort of even slight desperation in the White House, which they can't really admit, that they actually have got no leverage over him.
I think it's also important to make clear that even though General Kellogg has reached for the example of Berlin, which did have a large number of US troops, he has made it abundantly clear that in this situation of what he's suggesting for Ukraine, there will be no US troops as part of this plan. Do you find that striking?
Yes, none whatsoever. I mean, either he is going to take responsibility for an agreement, if one can call it an agreement, in fact, a diktat, or he is not. And if he's going to have any form of responsibility for what he is trying to impose on Ukraine, then he has to back it up with his own forces. Otherwise, it is simply a grotesquely irresponsible interference in international affairs.
Sir Antony, knowing what we know about Vladimir Putin and his regime, what is being suggested at the moment would see French and British troops be separated just by the Dnipro River. And on the other side, on the eastern part of Ukraine, Kherson, for example, would be Russian troops. Let's just, as a thought experiment, imagine that this goes ahead. How precarious, how dangerous, what would it do to world stability to have Russian troops facing off British and French troops separated by just a river?
Well, it's basically handing over half of Ukraine, the whole of the eastern half of Ukraine, to Putin straight away. Because if that's going to be a depopulated, an unmanned zone, now in the south of the country, in Kherson and so forth, yes, the river is more or less the borderline between the two sides. But up in the north, if British and French troops, if this was ever going to come to pass, are held behind on the west bank of the Dnipro, then Putin has just simply got an open target just to march forward, and there would be nothing that the Americans could do about it, and they would do nothing. They'd sort of say, oh, well, Ukraine was defeated anyway, and they'll just wash their hands. I think it's one of the most humiliating and appalling moments in modern history. There is no doubt about it that Ukraine should be treated in this particular way.
Do you think there is another solution? Do you think that there is a solution that doesn't see Ukrainian humiliation? Do you think that General Kellogg and the Trump administration can deliver it?
Well, what's alarming is in some ways Kellogg is one of the more, should we say, slightly more reliable members of the team. And if he's even coming up with a proposal like this, I think it shows quite how desperate the situation is for Ukraine itself. But I mean, there is no, frankly, there is no solution unless cast iron guarantees are given to Ukraine, because we know we cannot trust Putin. Putin can never be trusted. It is a gangster state. And he will do anything that he can, and he is absolutely determined to destroy the sovereignty of Ukraine itself. It is not a deal over land, as Trump keeps on trying to convince himself. As far as Putin is concerned, he wants to make sure that Ukraine is going to collapse completely as an independent state. And that's one of the reasons why he's also got his eye on Odessa, because that would immediately destroy Ukraine by cutting it off on the western side, and also would enable him to have a go at Moldova.
Sir Antony, before we go, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the US administration. Not a few weeks ago, we were privy by the accident of including a journalist in a Signal group chat that were discussing Houthi targets in Yemen. But we saw there an antipathy directed at Europe from J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State for Defense there. As a historian who perfectly understands the relationship that Europe has had with the US, particularly when it comes to military support, what goes through your mind when you read that antipathy of this new Trump administration towards Europe?
Well, there's an interesting degree of paranoia in their attitude towards Europe. They have convinced themselves that, in fact, Europe has been out to do them down, to somehow screw them, is the great phrase. Europe's, and that was the whole purpose of the common market, was to do down America. Well, I mean, there are one or two, one can remember Jean-Jacques Servan-Schreiber, Le Défi Américain, and books like that, going way back, which showed that, Europe did not want to be subservient to America. But it wasn't to try to screw America. What they have failed to understand is actually it was idleness and, to a much larger degree, sheer idealism, the belief that war was unthinkable on the European landmass, and that somehow everybody had learned the lesson of the Second World War, and that was why we had the European Union to prevent war in Europe again and all the rest of it. But of course, it was, shall we say, a wildly optimistic view of the future, a rosy one, and they refused to listen to even the lessons of the past. We had both Gerhard Schröder and Angela Merkel believing that by embracing Russia with communications and commerce, it would never be a threat again. They completely refuse to understand it. And this has been our problem. It has basically been democratic confirmation bias. We simply cannot understand the mentality of dictators.
Sir Antony, always good to speak to you. Thank you so much for giving us all this time. I really appreciate it.